The sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty town of Redstone Creek, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1876. Heat waves shimmered off the packed earth of Main Street, creating ghostly mirages that danced between the weathered wooden buildings. The town church bell tolled noon, its bronze voice cutting through the oppressive silence that blanketed the settlement during the hottest part of the day. Sarah McKenna wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a faint smudge of flour across her forehead. The general store was stifling despite the open windows, and the heavy cotton of her work dress clung uncomfortably to her skin. She'd been up since dawn, helping her father Marcus prepare for the weekly supply wagon from Tucson. Now, as the afternoon heat reached its peak, even the flies seemed too exhausted to buzz. "Sarah, mind the counter," her father called from the storeroom. "I need to check the inventory ledgers." "Yes, Papa," she replied automatically, though her mind was elsewhere, gazing through the window at the empty street. At 23, she'd spent most of her life behind this counter, watching the world pass by through glass panes dusty with desert grit. The bell above the door chimed, and she turned with practiced efficiency, ready to greet another customer seeking tobacco or ammunition or perhaps some of the peppermint sticks they kept in glass jars. But the words died on her lips as a stranger ducked through the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorframe. His hair was dark as midnight, worn longer than was fashionable, tied back with a leather cord. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, green as spring grass with flecks of gold, set in a face that spoke of mixed heritage. High cheekbones and bronze skin suggested Indian blood, while the stubborn set of his jaw and the faint trace of freckles across his nose whispered of Irish ancestry. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I'm looking for provisions, trail rations mostly." Sarah found her voice, though it came out steadier than she felt. "Of course. You'll find dried beans and salt pork along the back wall. Coffee and hardtack on the shelves to your right." He nodded, moving through the store with the easy grace of a man accustomed to navigating tight spaces. His spurs jingled softly with each step, and she noticed the worn Colt .45 holstered low on his hip, tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. "You new to Redstone Creek?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from any real curiosity. Strangers came and went. They rarely stayed long in a town this small. "Just rode in this morning," he replied, selecting items with careful deliberation. "Name's James Callahan. Most folks call me Red, on account of my temper when I was younger." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though I've mellowed some since then. "Sarah McKenna," she offered in return. "My father owns this establishment." He paused in his shopping to look at her properly, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. "McKenna, good Irish name. Your family been here long?" 10 years come October. Papa moved us out here after—" She trailed off, unwilling to share the story of her mother's death with a stranger. "After we lost our farm in Missouri." James nodded as if he understood the things left unsaid. He continued gathering supplies, adding matches, tobacco, and a new whetstone to his growing pile. When he approached the counter, Sarah tallied his purchases with efficient movements, trying not to notice the way his hands, calloused and strong-moved as he counted out coins. "That'll be $4.30, she said. He paid without haggling, which marked him as either honest or flush with cash. As she made change, their fingers brushed briefly, and she pulled back as if burned. He noticed, of course, those green eyes missed nothing, but he didn't comment. "Thank you kindly, Miss McKenna," he said, gathering his purchases. "Might I ask, is there a boarding house in town I'll be staying on a few days?" "Hi, Mrs. Holloway runs a respectable establishment 2 streets over. Clean beds and fair prices." She hesitated, then added, "Though if you're looking for work, The Sherman Ranch is always hiring experienced hands. Appreciate the information. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back. It was a pleasure making your acquaintance. Miss McKenna. I suspect I'll be needing more supplies before long. Then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of leather and trail dust behind. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat a rapid tattoo against her ribs. She'd met dozens of cowboys, miners, and drifters over the years. None had ever made her feel so unsettled. Sarah, her father emerged from the storeroom, ledger in hand. Who was that? Just a customer, she said, turning away to straighten already neat shelves. A Mr. Callahan. He's new in town. Marcus McKenna's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd become protective since her mother's passing. Perhaps overly so. Looked like a half-breed to me. Best keep your distance from his type. Sarah's hands stilled on the bolt of calico she'd been adjusting. He was perfectly polite, Papa, and his money spends the same as anyone else's. That may be, but you mark my words. Men like that bring trouble. I've seen his kind before. Irish and Indian mixing never leads to anything good. She wanted to argue, to point out the unfairness of judging a man by his bloodline. But years of keeping peace had taught her the futility of challenging her father's prejudices. Instead, she simply nodded and returned to her work, though her thoughts kept drifting to Green Eyes and the way he'd said her name. The afternoon wore on, bringing the usual trickle of customers. Mrs. Patterson needed thread for her quilting circle. Old Pete stumbled in seeking his daily bottle of rot-gut whiskey. The Hendricks boys came for penny candy, their faces sticky with sweat and mischief. Through it all, Sarah performed her duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere, as the sun began its descent toward the jagged mountains that bordered the valley, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The bell chimed again. Sarah looked up from the account books she'd been updating, her heart performing a strange little skip when she saw James Callahan standing in the doorway. Back already, Mr. Callahan, she asked, proud of how normal her voice sounded. Forgot a few things, he said, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. Mainly ammunition. Can never have too much when you're heading into unknown territory. She directed him to the ammunition display, watching from beneath lowered lashes as he selected boxes of cartridges. This time, she noticed more details, the way he favored his left shoulder slightly, suggesting an old injury, the careful way he moved, always keeping the door in his peripheral vision, the quality of his boots and gun belt, well maintained despite showing wear. You planning on starting a war? She asked, attempting levity as he brought 3 boxes to the counter. Just like being prepared, he replied. Though in my experience, the best way to avoid a fight is to be ready for one. Spoken like a man who's seen his share of trouble. Maybe. He leaned against the counter, studying her with those unsettling eyes. But I'm trying to leave trouble behind. That's why I'm here, looking for a fresh start. Honest work, maybe a place to finally set down roots. Redstone Creek might disappoint you then. It's not exactly a thriving metropolis. I don't need a metropolis. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Just a place where a man can be judged by what he does, not what he is. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. That's a noble sentiment, Mr. Callahan, but I fear you'll find people are the same everywhere. Quick to judge, slow to accept. You speaking from experience? She thought of her mother, how the town had whispered when she'd taken ill, claiming it was punishment for marrying beneath her station, how those same gossips had clucked their tongues at the funeral, offering condolences that felt more like accusations. Perhaps, she said carefully. But I've learned it's easier to give people what they expect. Save yourself the disappointment. That's a lonely way to live. Maybe, but it's safe. He paid for his ammunition, and this time when their hands touched, neither pulled away immediately. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like an eternity. "I should go," he said finally. "Mrs. Holloway's holding supper for me." "Of course." He made it halfway to the door before turning back. "Miss McKenna, Sarah, would it be too forward if I said I hope to see you again? Not just for supplies. I mean—" She should have demurred, should have hidden behind propriety and her father's expectations. Instead, she found herself saying, "I work here every day except Sunday. The store opens at 7. His smile transformed his face, softening the harsh angles and making him look younger. "Then I reckon I'll be needing supplies regular-like. Good evening, Miss Sarah." After he left, she stood in the gathering twilight, trying to make sense of the flutter in her stomach and the racing of her pulse. She'd sworn off romantic notions years ago, had built walls around her heart as sturdy as any fort. Love was for fools and dreamers, not for practical women who'd seen what it cost. But as she closed the store and made her way upstairs to their living quarters, she couldn't stop thinking about green eyes and gentle hands, about a man seeking redemption in a hard land that rarely offered second chances. And for the first time in years, she wondered if perhaps she'd been wrong about love after all. The desert night fell like a curtain, bringing blessed coolness and a canopy of stars that stretched from horizon to horizon. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its cry both mournful and defiant. Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the town she'd called home for so long, and felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the armor she'd worn for so long. Change was coming to Redstone Creek, whether she wanted it or not, and it wore spurs and spoke with an Irish lilt and had eyes the color of spring. The only question was whether she'd have the courage to meet it head-on, or whether she'd hide behind her counter and let it pass her by like so many other chances at happiness. Time would tell. In the desert, time was all anyone really had. The weeks that followed James Callahan's arrival in Redstone Creek fell into a pattern as predictable as the desert sunrise. He would appear at the store every few days, always with some legitimate need: rope, coffee, a new bandana, and always lingering longer than necessary. Sarah found herself watching for him, her heart performing that peculiar skip whenever the bell above the door announced a customer. "You're running through supplies mighty fast," she observed one morning, tallying up his latest purchases. "Either you're the most well-stocked cowhand in the territory, or you've got another reason for these visits." James leaned against the counter, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Maybe I just appreciate good service and pleasant company. Mr. Callahan." "James," he corrected gently. "Or Red, if you prefer, Mr. Callahan was my father, and he's been gone these 15 years. "James, then—" She tested the name, finding she liked how it felt. "People are beginning to notice your frequent visits. Mrs. Patterson mentioned it at the church social last Sunday."
Let them talk. I've done nothing improper."
"No, but—" She struggled to find the words. How could she explain the delicate balance of reputation in a small town? How whispers could destroy a woman's prospects? "This isn't San Francisco or Denver. People here have long memories and sharp tongues."
"I know exactly what kind of place this is,"
he said, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "I've been in a dozen towns just like it, but I had hoped—" He stopped himself, straightening. "Forgive me, I don't mean to cause you trouble." The hurt in his eyes made her chest tighten.
"That's not what I meant."
"Isn't it?" He gathered his purchases with quick, efficient movements. "I understand. Miss McKenna, a woman like you, respectable and refined, can't be seen keeping company with a half-breed drifter. I should have known better."
"Stop!"
The word came out sharper than she intended.
"Don't put words in my mouth.
James Callahan. And don't you dare walk out that door thinking I'm like those gossips who have nothing better to do than judge others." He paused, one hand on the door. "Then what are you saying?" Sarah came around the counter, closing the distance between them, this close. She could see the faint scar that ran through his left eyebrow. the way his jaw tensed when he was upset. I'm saying that I look forward to your visits, perhaps more than I should, but I need you to understand what's at stake for me. And what's that? Everything. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. This store, my father's respect, my place in this town. I can't just follow my heart like some heroine in a dime novel. The world doesn't work that way for women like me. Women like you, he repeated softly. You mean women who've convinced themselves they're made of stone instead of flesh and blood? The accusation stung because it was true. I've had to be stone. You don't understand. Don't I? He set down his parcels and moved closer, until only a hand's breadth separated them. You think you're the only one who's built walls, who's had to be harder than you want to be just to survive, Sarah. I've spent my whole life not fitting anywhere. Too white for the Comanche who raised me after my mother died. Too Indian for the Irish who should have been my people. You talk about losing everything. I never had anything to lose in the first place. The raw pain in his voice broke something inside her. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her palm resting against his cheek. He went very still, as if afraid any movement might frighten her away. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. Sarah? Her father's voice from the storeroom shattered the moment like a rock through glass. She jerked back, her face flaming, just as Marcus appeared in the doorway. His eyes took in the scene, their proximity, her flushed cheeks, James's defensive posture, and his face darkened. Mr. Callahan was just leaving, Sarah said quickly. I can see that. Marcus's voice was cold as winter frost. In the future, Mr. Callahan, please confine your visits to necessary purchases only. My daughter has work to do. James's jaw tightened, but he merely touched his hat brim. Of course, Mr. McKenna. Good day to you both. After he left, the silence in the store felt oppressive. Sarah busied herself with straightening shelves that didn't need straightening, aware of her father's eyes boring into her back. That man is trouble, Marcus said finally. I forbid you to encourage him. Sarah's hand stilled. Slowly, she turned to face her father. Forbid? You heard me. I've seen how you look at him. Girl, nothing good can come of it. He's done nothing wrong. Papa, he's polite, pays in cash, and has been nothing but respectful. He's a half-breed drifter with no prospects and no family. Is that the future you want, living in some shack, bearing his mixed-blood children while respectable folk cross the street to avoid you? The cruelty of his words took her breath away. Papa, how can you say such things? Because I love you, he said, his voice softening slightly. Because I promised your mother I'd protect you. She wouldn't want this for you, Sarah. She'd want you to marry well, to have security and respectability. Like she had. The words escaped before she could stop them. Mama married for love. Papa, not security. She told me so before she died. She said it was the one choice she never regretted, even when things were hard. Marcus's face went pale, then red. Your mother was delirious with fever. She didn't know what she was saying. She knew exactly what she was saying. Years of suppressed grief and anger bubbled to the surface. She told me not to make her mistakes. I thought she meant marrying beneath her station. But that wasn't it at all. She meant giving up who she was to please others. She meant letting fear dictate her choices. Enough. Marcus slammed his hand on the counter. I won't have you dishonor your mother's memory with this nonsense. You'll do as I say. Or what? Sarah lifted her chin. You'll disown me. Cast me out. Go ahead, Papa, but know this. I've spent 5 years behind this counter, keeping your books, charming your customers, being the dutiful daughter. I've turned down 3 marriage proposals because the men weren't good enough for your standards. I've watched life pass me by through these windows. And for what? So I can die an old maid, respected but unloved. Marcus stared at her as if seeing a stranger. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I won't tolerate this disrespect. You'll go to your room and think about your behavior. And if that man comes in again, you'll call me to serve him. Is that understood?" Sarah wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But she saw the fear beneath her father's anger. Fear of losing her, of failing in his promise to her mother. So she nodded stiffly and climbed the stairs to their living quarters, each step feeling like a defeat. In her room, she sat on the narrow bed and stared at the sampler her mother had stitched years ago. "Love bears all things." The irony wasn't lost on her. Love had borne her mother to an early grave, worn down by hardship and loss. Was that the fate that awaited her if she followed her heart? A soft sound drew her to the window, below in the alley. James stood in the shadows, looking up at her window. When he saw her, he touched his hat, then placed his hand over his heart, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed more than words ever could. Then he was gone, melting back into the afternoon heat. Sarah pressed her forehead against the glass, feeling the cool surface against her burning skin. "I don't believe in love," she whispered to the empty room. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She was already falling, had been since that first day when he'd walked through her door and looked at her with those impossible green eyes. The question was whether she'd have the courage to keep falling, or whether she'd pull back to safety before it was too late. And in her heart, she feared she already knew the answer. That evening, as she served dinner in stony silence, her father finally spoke. "Thomas Brennan asked after you today." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh." "He's interested in courting you. His father owns the largest ranch in the valley. It would be a good match." "Thomas Brennan is a bully and a braggart. He's established, wealthy, from good stock. He's cruel to his horses and worse to his workers." Marcus set down his fork. "Sarah, be sensible. You're 23. Most women your age are married with children. How many more chances do you think you'll have?" "I'd rather have no chances than settle for a man like Thomas Brennan. Even if the alternative is that half-breed cowboy who'll give you nothing but heartache." Sarah pushed back from the table. "James Callahan is twice the man Thomas Brennan could ever be. And if you can't see that, then you're not the father I thought you were." She fled to her room before he could respond, locking the door behind her. Through the thin walls, she could hear him moving about, the clink of dishes as he cleaned up their abandoned dinner, eventually. His footsteps climbed the stairs, pausing outside her door. "Sarah," he called softly, "I'm only trying to protect you." She didn't answer, and after a moment, he moved on to his own room. Sarah lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and thinking about choices and consequences, about stone walls and the men who could make them crumble with just a smile. Somewhere in the night, a guitar played a mournful Spanish melody. The sound drifted through her open window like a caress, and she found herself thinking it sounded like the music of a heart that had forgotten how to hope, just like hers. But then she remembered the look in James's eyes that afternoon, the way he'd placed his hand over his heart, and for the first time in years, Sarah McKenna allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to believe in something more than mere survival. The thought terrified her, but not nearly as much as the thought of never trying at all. The following Sunday, Sarah slipped out of church early, claiming a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. Thomas Brennan had spent the entire service staring at her from his family's pew, and his attention made her temples throb. She knew her father would expect her to accept Thomas's courtship, knew the whole town was watching and waiting for the announcement. Instead of heading home, she found herself walking toward the creek that gave the town its name. The water was low this time of year, barely a trickle over smooth red stones, but the cottonwoods along its banks provided blessed shade. She'd come here often as a girl, when her mother was still alive and the world seemed less complicated. "Fancy meeting you here." She whirled to find James leaning against a tree, his church clothes, a clean white shirt and dark vest, making him look both handsome and, somehow, vulnerable. "Are you following me?" No, ma'am. I come here most Sundays after service. It's peaceful. He gestured to a flat rock near the water. I usually sit there and think, or try not to think, depending on the day. I should go, she said, but made no move to leave. Should you? He stepped closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I've taken a permanent position at the Sherman Ranch. Good wages, steady work. I'm not just some drifter anymore. Why are you telling me this? You know why. His green eyes held hers steadily. Your father made his feelings clear, and I respect that. But I need you to know that I'm not what he thinks I am. I've got plans. Sarah, I'm saving to buy my own piece of land, maybe start a small ranch. I'm not asking you to wait for me or make any promises. I needed you to know. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It doesn't matter what your plans are. My father will never accept you, and Thomas Brennan has made his intentions known. Thomas Brennan, James repeated, his jaw tightening. I've heard about him, how he treats his workers, especially the Mexican and Indian ones. Is that really the kind of man you want to spend your life with? What I want doesn't matter. Doesn't it? He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the soap he'd used that morning. Sarah, I've watched you these past weeks. You're dying inside that store, that town. You're like a bird in a cage, and everyone's so busy admiring your pretty feathers they don't notice you're forgetting how to fly. Don't! The word came out as a broken whisper. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I can't help it. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. The first time I saw you, something inside me just recognized you. Like I'd been searching my whole life and didn't even know it until I walked into that store. James, she leaned into his touch despite herself. I don't believe in love. I've seen what it does to people. It makes them weak, vulnerable. It destroys them. Then believe in me, he said simply. Believe that I'm strong enough for both of us, that I'll never let anything destroy you. The sincerity in his voice undid her. Before she could think better of it, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and the question became an answer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sarah's hands clutched his vest, and she could feel his heart racing beneath the fabric. This is madness, she whispered. Maybe. He rested his forehead against hers. But it's the sanest I've felt in years. A branch cracked behind them, and they sprang apart. Thomas Brennan stood at the edge of the clearing, his pale eyes cold as winter ice. Well, well, he drawled. What have we here, Miss McKenna? Your father's looking for you. Seemed mighty worried when you didn't come home after church. Sarah straightened her spine. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Brennan. I'll return directly. I'll escort you. It wasn't a request. Thomas's gaze shifted to James, and his hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. You're that half-breed Sherman hired Callahan, isn't it? That's right. James's voice was calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. Thought so. Word of advice. Boy, stick to your own kind. Miss McKenna here is spoken for. I wasn't aware the lady had accepted your suit, James said evenly. Thomas's face flushed. That's because you don't understand how things work in civilized society. But then, how could you? Your kind doesn't exactly run in our circles. Thomas, please, Sarah interjected. There's no need for... Oh, but there is. Thomas stepped closer to James, who held his ground. See, I don't take kindly to saddle tramps sniffing around my property. I'm not your property, Sarah said sharply. Not yet, Thomas agreed, his smile cold. But you will be. Your father's a practical man. He knows what's best for you. And what's best certainly isn't some mongrel cowboy who'll drag you down to his level. James moved so fast Sarah barely saw it. One moment Thomas was smirking. The next, he was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. James stood over him, fists clenched. "I'll let that one go because you deserved it," Thomas said, wiping blood from his face as he got to his feet. "But touch me again, and I'll see you hanged for assault. The sheriff's a personal friend of my family." "Then I'd better make it worth it," James said, stepping forward. Sarah caught his arm. "No, please, James, he's not worth it." Thomas laughed, an ugly sound. "Listen to her. Breed. She's the only thing standing between you and a rope." He straightened his vest, wincing as he touched his nose. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." "After he left," Sarah turned to James, her heart still racing. "You shouldn't have done that. He's dangerous when crossed." "I'm not afraid of Thomas Brennan." "You should be. His family owns half the valley. They have influence, power. They could make life very difficult for you." James took her hands in his. "Let them try. I've faced worse than spoiled ranchers' sons." His expression softened. "Are you all right?" "No," she admitted. "Everything's falling apart. My father will hear about this within the hour. The whole town will know by sunset." "Then come away with me," he said urgently. "Right now, I've got money saved. We could go to California, start fresh where nobody knows us." Sarah's heart leaped at the thought. Then reality crashed back down. "I can't just leave. The store, my father, he needs me." "He needs a servant, not a daughter. There's a difference." "He's all the family I have left. And if you stay, you'll end up married to Brennan. Is that what you want, to spend your life with a man who sees you as property, who'll crush everything wild and free in you until there's nothing left but a hollow shell?" Sarah pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. You just have to choose, him or me. That life or a new one, staying safe or taking a chance on something real. I need time to think. Time is the one thing we don't have." He touched her face gently. "Sarah, I know you're scared. I know what I'm asking you to risk. But I swear to you, on my mother's grave and my father's memory, I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy. That's all I can offer. Not wealth or position or the approval of society. Just a man who loves you and a chance at a life that's truly yours." Tears ran down her cheeks, unchecked. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." "You are. You're the bravest woman I've ever met. You just don't know it yet." A shout echoed from the direction of town. Sarah recognized her father's voice, tight with anger and worry. "I have to go," she said. "Sarah." "Meet me tonight," she said quickly. "Midnight, behind the store. I'll have an answer for you then." Before he could respond, she was running back toward town, toward the reckoning she knew awaited. Her father stood in the street, Thomas Brennan at his side, along with half the town's gossips who'd clearly come to witness the drama. "Inside," Marcus said, his voice like granite. "Now." Sarah held her head high as she walked past the gathered crowd, ignoring their whispers and stares. In the store, her father slammed the door and rounded on her. "How dare you?" he began, his face mottled with rage. "How dare you shame me? Shame your mother's memory by carrying on with that—" "Say it," Sarah interrupted. "Say what you really think. That half-breed, that mongrel, that savage. Say all the ugly words you're thinking. Papa?" "At least then we'll be honest with each other." Marcus's hand rose as if to strike her, then fell. "You don't know what you're doing. Brennan says he found you in a compromising position. Says that Cowboy assaulted him when confronted." "Thomas insulted him, called him property. James defended himself." "James, is it so familiar already?" Marcus sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "Sarah, please, I'm begging you. End this now before it goes too far. Marry Thomas Brennan. He's willing to overlook today's incident if you agree immediately." "And if I refuse, then you're no daughter of mine," The words fell between them like stones. "I'll give you tonight to think about it. But come morning, you either accept Brennan's proposal or you pack your things and leave. I won't have you bringing scandal to this house." Sarah stared at her father, this man who'd raised her, who'd once carried her on his shoulders and called her his precious girl. "You'd really do that, cast me out for following my heart."
"I'd do it to save you from yourself," he said wearily. "Your mother thought love conquered all too. Look where it got her, dead at 30, worn out from following a dreamer to this God-forsaken place. I won't watch you make the same mistake."
"Maybe it wasn't a mistake," Sarah said softly. "Maybe the mistake was giving up who she was to become what everyone expected. Maybe that's what really killed her." Marcus flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Go to your room. You have until morning to decide your future." Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort, in her room. She sat at the window and watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, James was waiting, hoping, and somewhere in town, Thomas Brennan was nursing his wounded pride and plotting revenge. She thought of her mother, tried to remember her face before the sickness took her beauty. Had she been happy, or had she spent her days looking out windows too, wondering about roads not taken? "I don't believe in love," Sarah whispered to the gathering darkness. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie she could no longer maintain. Love had already found her, whether she believed in it or not. The only question now was whether she had the courage to believe in herself. As midnight approached, Sarah made her choice. The clock had barely struck midnight when Sarah slipped out the back door, a small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest. The night was warm and still, with only the distant howl of coyotes breaking the silence. James waited in the shadows, his face etched with worry that transformed to relief when he saw her. "You came," he breathed. "I couldn't marry Thomas Brennan," she said simply. "I'd rather face the unknown with you than spend a lifetime in a cage, no matter how gilded." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. "We need to leave tonight. Brennan won't take rejection well." "I know. I've packed what I could carry." She pulled back to look at him. "James, are you certain once we leave?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He cupped her face gently. "We'll head west, maybe to New Mexico territory. I know people there who'll help us get started." They'd barely made it to the edge of town when hoofbeats thundered behind them. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized Thomas Brennan's voice shouting for them to stop. He wasn't alone. At least 4 riders accompanied him. "Keep walking," James said quietly, his hand moving to his gun. Well, Thomas called out, reining in his horse to block their path. "Sneaking off in the night like thieves. How appropriate." "We're leaving. Brennan," James said evenly. "No need for trouble." "Oh, but there is." Thomas dismounted, his companions following suit. Sarah recognized them as ranch hands from the Brennan spread, rough men known for their loyalty to their employer. "See, Miss McKenna here promised to marry me. Her father gave his word. In these parts, breaking a promise like that has consequences." "I made no promise," Sarah said, stepping forward despite James's attempt to shield her. "And my father had no right to make one for me." Thomas's smile was cold. "Ladies don't get to make those kinds of decisions. But don't worry, sweetheart. After we're done with your mongrel lover here, you'll come to see things properly." The violence erupted faster than Sarah could follow. Thomas drew his gun, but James was quicker, his shot sending the weapon spinning from Thomas's hand. The other men rushed forward, and suddenly James was fighting 3 at once while the 4th grabbed for Sarah. She twisted away, bringing her knee up sharply and causing the man to double over. James had dropped one attacker but was being overwhelmed by the others. Thomas, nursing his wounded hand, shouted encouragement to his men. That's when Sarah saw Thomas pull a hidden derringer from his vest, aiming it at James's back. Without thinking, She launched herself at him, knocking his arm aside just as he fired. The bullet went wide, and they tumbled to the ground in a tangle of limbs. "You little wildcat." Thomas snarled, backhanding her across the face. Stars exploded in her vision, but she held on, clawing at his eyes. A gunshot split the night, and everyone froze. Sheriff Wade Patterson sat on his horse, rifle pointed skyward, his weathered face stern in the moonlight. "That's enough. Everyone step back." "Sheriff," Thomas began, "this half-breed assaulted—" "I saw what happened. Brennan—" The sheriff interrupted. "Seemed to me like you and your boys were the ones doing the assaulting. 5 against 1 ain't exactly fair odds." Sarah helped James to his feet. His lip was split, and a bruise was already forming on his cheek, but he was otherwise unhurt. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. Patterson studied them for a long moment. "You two planning on leaving town?" "Yes, sir," James replied. "Might be for the best." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Thomas. "And you, young Brennan, might want to consider that not everything in this world belongs to you just because you want it. Now get on home before I decide to look more closely at what happened here." Thomas's face was murderous, but he mounted his horse. "This isn't over," he promised. "You can't run far enough or fast enough. I'll find you." After they'd gone, Sheriff Patterson looked down at Sarah and James. "You've got maybe an hour's head start before he comes back with more men. There's a stage heading south at dawn from Cedar Falls, about 10 miles west. If you ride hard, you can make it." "Why are you helping us?" Sarah asked. The sheriff's stern face softened slightly. "I knew your mother, Miss McKenna. Fine woman. She'd have wanted you to have a chance at happiness, not be sold off like cattle." He touched his hat. "Good luck to you both." As the sheriff rode away, James took Sarah's hand. "Are you hurt?" "No," she touched his split lip gently. "But you are." "I've had worse." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Sarah, that was incredibly brave. What you did, also incredibly foolish. I couldn't let him shoot you in the back. You could have been killed." "So could you." She met his gaze steadily. "If we're doing this, we're doing it together. I won't be protected and coddled. I'm your partner, not your possession." A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, ma'am. Partners it is." They retrieved James's horse from where he'd left it and set off west. Sarah riding behind him with her arms wrapped around his waist. The night desert was a different world, mysterious and somewhat frightening. But she found she wasn't afraid. Not with James's solid warmth in front of her and the vast sweep of stars overhead. They rode hard, stopping only to rest the horse, and reached Cedar Falls just as the eastern sky began to lighten. The tiny settlement was barely more than a way station, but the promised stagecoach sat ready for departure. 2 passages south, James told the driver, counting out most of his savings. As they waited to board, Sarah looked back the way they'd come. Somewhere behind them was everything she'd ever known. Her father, the store, the life she'd been expected to live. Ahead lay uncertainty, hardship, and quite possibly danger. "Second thoughts?" James asked softly. "No." She turned to face him. This man who had upended her carefully ordered world. "I meant what I said about not believing in love. But I believe in you, James Callahan. I believe in us. That's enough for now." He kissed her then, right there in front of the other passengers, not caring who saw. It was a promise and a claim. A goodbye to the old and a welcome to the new. The stage pulled out as the sun crested the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Through the window, Sarah watched the landscape change, each mile taking them farther from everything familiar. James held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "Where exactly are we heading?" she asked. "Las Cruces first. I've got a friend there who runs a freight business. He might have work. After that," he shrugged.
Wherever the road takes us. That's not much of a plan.
Do you trust me? She thought about it. This leap of faith she'd taken. Yes, God help me, but yes.
Then that's all the plan we need. The stagecoach rumbled on, carrying them toward a future neither could predict. There would be challenges ahead. Sarah knew that. Thomas Brennan might make good on his threats. Her father might never forgive her. Society would judge them harshly for their mixed union. But as she leaned against James's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, Sarah found she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was living on her own terms, making her own choices. The price might be high, but the freedom was worth it.
Tell me about your mother,
she said.
Your real mother,
not the one who raised you. James was quiet for a long moment.
Her name was Mary O'Sullivan.
Red hair like fire and a temper to match.
Or so my father said. She died when I was 3. Fever took her. My father tried to raise me alone, but he shrugged.
A mining camp is no place for a child. When he died in a cave-in, his Comanche friend White Eagle took me in, raised me as his own.
Do you remember her at all?
Sometimes I think I do. A voice singing Irish lullabies, the smell of lavender soap. But I'm not sure if they're real memories or just stories I've told myself.
Sarah squeezed his hand.
I'm sorry. Don't be. White Eagle was a good father. Taught me to track, to shoot, to read the land. His people accepted me. Mostly. It wasn't always easy, being caught between two worlds, but it made me who I am.
And who is that?
He turned to look at her, his green eyes serious. A man who knows what it's like to not belong anywhere, until now. The simple declaration made her throat tight.
James,
I know you don't believe in love. Sarah, that's all right. I've got enough faith for both of us. But I need you to know. I'll spend however long it takes proving to you that some things are worth believing in. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful in the morning light. It was a hard land that didn't forgive weakness or mistakes, but it was also a land of possibilities, where people could reinvent themselves, where the past didn't have to define the future. Sarah thought of her mother's sampler, "Love bears all things." She'd always focused on the burden in those words, the weight of bearing. But now she wondered if maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't about enduring love like a hardship, but about love giving you the strength to bear whatever came. My mother told me once, she said slowly, that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's fear. Fear of being hurt, of being vulnerable, of losing control. She looked at James.
I've been afraid for so long I'd forgotten there was another way to live.
And now, she smiled, feeling something crack open inside her chest, like ice breaking up on a frozen river. Now I'm starting to think that maybe the only thing scarier than loving someone is never trying at all. The stagecoach hit a rut, jolting them against each other. James steadied her, his arm coming around her shoulders. It felt natural. Right, like coming home to a place she'd never been but always belonged. They had no idea what awaited them in Las Cruces or beyond. The future was as uncertain as the desert weather, as unpredictable as a wild Mustang. But for the first time in her life, Sarah McKenna, no, she supposed she wasn't a McKenna anymore, wasn't anything but herself, was eager to meet whatever came next. Because she wasn't facing it alone, and maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference. Las Cruces proved to be a brief respite. James's friend, Miguel Santos, offered them work and a small room above his freight office. But after only 2 weeks, word arrived that made their blood run cold. Thomas Brennan had put out a bounty on James, $500 for his capture, dead or alive. The charge was kidnapping and horse theft, lies that would stick because of the Brennan family's influence. You need to leave, Miguel urged, pacing his small office. Today, bounty hunters are already sniffing around. That kind of money will bring every gun for hire in the territory. Sarah stood at the window, watching the busy street below.
She'd traded her proper dresses for practical riding clothes, split skirts and sturdy boots that would have scandalized Redstone Creek's proper ladies. "Where can we go that they won't follow?"
"West," James said without hesitation.
"Deep into Apache territory. Most bounty hunters won't risk it."
"Most sane people won't risk it," Miguel corrected. "James, the Apache are at war. The Army's been chasing Victorio's band all summer."
"I know, but I also know some of the people. White Eagle traded with them. They might remember me." Sarah turned from the window. "And if they don't?" "Then we keep riding until we find somewhere safe." He met her gaze steadily. "I won't lie to you, Sarah. It's dangerous. If you want to stay here, find work in town while I lead them away." "We're partners," she interrupted. "Where you go, I go." They left that night under cover of darkness, supplied by Miguel with provisions, ammunition, and warnings. The desert they entered was different from the relatively tame lands around Redstone Creek. This was raw wilderness, where water was scarce and death waited behind every rock. For 3 days they rode hard, following game trails and dry washes, always watching their back trail. Sarah learned to read the land like James did, the way birds fell silent when riders approached. How dust clouds betrayed movement miles away. Which plants indicated water nearby. On the 4th day, their vigilance paid off. James spotted the dust cloud first, still distant but closing steadily. 3 riders, he said, studying the horizon. Maybe 4. Bounty hunters. Most likely. He scanned their surroundings, then pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. "We'll make our stand there." "Stand." Sarah's mouth went dry. "We're going to fight. Can't outrun them forever. Better to choose our ground." He helped her dismount behind the largest boulder. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me to handle a rifle for coyotes and such." "Men are different than coyotes." He handed her his Winchester. "But the principle's the same. Aim center mass and squeeze. Don't jerk the trigger." They didn't have long to wait. 4 riders appeared, spreading out as they approached. Sarah recognized the type hard men with sun-weathered faces and cold eyes, the kind who'd sell their own mothers for the right price. "James Callahan." The leader called out, "We know you're up there. Come quiet-like, and we might even let your woman go." "Generous of you." James called back, "But I'll have to decline. $500 buys a lot of bullets. Breed. We can wait you out." Sarah sighted down the rifle barrel, her hands surprisingly steady. Beside her, James was calm as stone, his revolver ready. "On my signal," he whispered. "Take the one on the far left." The first bounty hunter made the mistake of advancing too eagerly. James's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Sarah fired a heartbeat later, her bullet kicking up dust at her target's feet. The man dove for cover, cursing. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. The bounty hunters had numbers, but James and Sarah had the high ground and better cover. Bullets whined off rocks, showering them with chips and dust. Sarah reloaded with trembling fingers, proud when her second shot found its mark, wounding another attacker in the leg. Then disaster struck. A lucky shot from below caught James in the side, the impact throwing him back. Sarah cried out, dropping the rifle to press her hands against the spreading red stain on his shirt. "Keep shooting," he gritted out, struggling to sit up. "You're hurt. I've had worse. Keep them pinned down." She grabbed the rifle, fury replacing fear. These men wanted to take James from her, to collect blood money for lies. She fired steadily, forcing the bounty hunters to keep their heads down, while James bound his wound with strips torn from his shirt. Just when their ammunition was running low, thunder rumbled across the clear sky. But it wasn't thunder. It was hoofbeats. A dozen Apache warriors crested the ridge behind them, weapons ready. The bounty hunters took one look and fled. apparently deciding $500 wasn't worth facing Apache warriors in their own territory. The lead warrior dismounted, studying them with dark, intelligent eyes. He said something in Apache, and James responded in the same language. His voice strained with pain. "You are White Eagle's son," the warrior said in accented English. "The one who walks between worlds." "I am," James confirmed. "This is my woman, Sarah." The warrior's gaze shifted to her, taking in the rifle in her hands, the determination in her eyes. "She fights well for a white woman. Come, our camp is near. Our healer will tend your wound." The Apache camp was a collection of wickiups hidden in a box canyon, invisible until you were nearly on top of it. Women and children emerged to stare at the strangers, particularly Sarah with her light hair and pale skin. The healer, an elderly woman with knowing eyes, cleaned and dressed James's wound while Sarah hovered anxiously. "The bullet passed through," the woman said in English. "He is lucky. Rest and time will heal it." For a week they stayed with the band, James recovering while Sarah learned skills she'd never imagined needing. The Apache women, initially suspicious, warmed to her when they saw she was willing to work and learn. They taught her to find water in the desert, which plants could heal and which could harm, how to move silently across rough ground. "You are not like other white women," one young mother observed, watching Sarah practice with a skinning knife. "You adapt." "I had a good teacher," Sarah replied, glancing at James where he rested in the shade. The warrior who'd rescued them, who she learned was named Naichi, sought them out on their last evening. "Soldiers come," he said simply. "Many soldiers. We must move our camp deeper into the mountains. You cannot come with us." "I understand," James said. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Where will you go?" "North, maybe Colorado territory, far from those who hunt us." Naichi nodded. "There is an old trail through the mountains. Difficult, but it will take you north without crossing soldier paths. I will show you." They left at dawn, laden with supplies and guided to the hidden trail by Naichi himself. Before departing, he clasped James's arm. "You chose a strong woman," he said. "That is good. The times ahead will need strength." The trail was indeed difficult, winding through passes so narrow they had to lead the horses, climbing ridges that left them gasping in the thin air. But it was also beautiful, a wild, untouched land of soaring peaks and hidden valleys where no white man had set foot. On the third night, camped by a mountain stream, Sarah finally allowed herself to fully feel the fear she'd suppressed during the fight. "I could have lost you," she whispered against James's chest. "When I saw that blood." "But you didn't," he soothed, stroking her hair. "You saved us both. Where did that fierce woman come from? The one who stood off 4 bounty hunters?" "I don't know." She pulled back to look at him. "I've never been so terrified and so clear-headed at the same time. All I could think was that they weren't going to take you from me." "My warrior woman," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "You've changed. Sarah, the proper shopkeeper's daughter, is gone. Do you miss her?" "No, because she was only half alive. This Sarah, the one who fights beside me and learns from Apache women and isn't afraid to get her hands dirty. This is who you were meant to be." She thought about that as they continued north, how crisis had stripped away everything she'd thought defined her, leaving only the essential core. Without the constraints of society, the expectations and judgments, she was free to discover who she really was. And that woman, it turned out, was far stronger than she'd ever imagined. They emerged from the mountains into the vast grasslands of southern Colorado, where the sky seemed endless and the wind sang of freedom. James's wound had healed well, leaving only a scar to mark their brush with death. "We could stop here," he suggested one evening, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. "Find a town, start fresh. I could work cattle. You could, well, what would you want to do?" Sarah considered. The old her would have said work in a store, find something safe and respectable. But that woman was gone, left somewhere on the desert trail. "I want to learn to really shoot," she said, "and ride better, and maybe—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Maybe we could start that ranch you talked about. Build something of our own." James's smile was like sunrise. "Partners." Partners. They made love that night under the stars, the grass soft beneath them and the night wind cool on their skin. It was different from their desperate couplings on the trail. Slower, deeper, a claiming and a promise. Sarah traced the new scar on his side, marveling that they'd survived when so much had been against them. "Do you regret it?" James asked softly, "leaving everything behind?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I regret not doing it sooner. Your father might forgive you eventually. We could write—" "No." She pressed a finger to his lips. "That life is dead to me. Sarah McKenna died the night we left Redstone Creek. I don't know who I am now, but I know I'm not her anymore." "Then who are you?" She considered, looking up at the vast sweep of stars. "I'm the woman who chose you. The woman who fought for us. The woman who's not afraid anymore." She smiled. "I suppose I'll figure out the rest as we go." "I love you," he said simply. "Whoever you are, whoever you become." The words hung in the air between them, a truth she still couldn't quite return, but she was closer now, could feel the walls around her heart crumbling a little more each day. Soon, perhaps, she'd be brave enough to say the words back. For now, she showed him with her body what her voice couldn't yet express, and that was enough. They had survived pursuit and violence, had crossed deserts and mountains, had found unexpected allies in unlikely places. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And maybe that was its own kind of love, the choosing, day after day, to stand beside someone no matter what came. Maybe believing in that was the first step to believing in everything else. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging, witnessing one more pair of lovers trying to carve out their own destiny in a hard land. And somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang its wild song, a sound that no longer seemed mournful to Sarah, but free. The town of Sage Valley, Colorado, wasn't much to look at. A collection of weathered buildings huddled against the endless prairie wind. But to Sarah and James, trail-worn and weary after weeks of travel, it looked like paradise. More importantly, it was far enough from Arizona that Thomas Brennan's reach shouldn't extend here. They found work at the Double Bar Ranch, owned by a gruff but fair man named Harrison Cole. James hired on as a horse trainer, his gift with animals quickly earning respect from the other hands. Sarah, to everyone's surprise, including her own, became the ranch cook after the previous one quit without notice. "Can you actually cook?" James had asked, amused, when she volunteered for the position. "How hard can it be?" she'd replied with more confidence than she felt. Very hard, as it turned out. Her first attempts resulted in burned biscuits, undercooked beans, and coffee that could strip paint. But Sarah had learned she was nothing if not determined. She studied the previous cook's recipes, experimented tirelessly, and within a month had the ranch hands singing her praises. "Best damn apple pie I ever ate," declared Hank Morrison, the foreman, reaching for his third slice. "Where'd you learn to cook like this, Mrs. Callahan, team?" The assumed name still made her start. They'd decided to present themselves as married to avoid questions, though no ceremony had blessed their union. "Here and there," she said vaguely. "Amazing what you can learn when you have to." Their cabin was small but sturdy, set apart from the bunkhouse for privacy. Sarah had made it a home with small touches, wildflowers in a mason jar, curtains sewn from fabric bought with her first wages, a rag rug by the hearth. It was humble, nothing like the comfortable rooms above her father's store, but it was theirs. One evening, as autumn painted the aspens gold, James came home with news.
Cole's offered to sell me 20 acres of bottom land by the creek. Says if I can improve it, run some cattle, he'll give me a fair price and time to pay. Sarah looked up from the shirt she was mending. Our own land. The start of it, anyway. It's not much, but with work. He trailed off, studying her face. What do you think? I think yes. She set aside her sewing and went to him. I have some money saved from my wages. We could buy a few head of cattle, maybe some chickens. It'll be hard work, harder than this. When has that ever stopped us? They sealed the deal with Cole the next day and spent every spare moment working their little piece of land. James built a small corral while Sarah planted a kitchen garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. They bought 3 cows and a bull, the beginning of what they hoped would grow into a proper herd. The other ranch hands helped when they could, having accepted the couple as their own. If anyone wondered about James's mixed heritage or Sarah's lack of a wedding ring, they kept it to themselves. The frontier had a way of letting people reinvent themselves, and Sage Valley was no exception. Winter arrived early that year, howling down from the mountains with a fury that left Sarah breathless. She'd thought Arizona winters were cold, but Colorado taught her the true meaning of the word. Ice formed inside the cabin windows, and snow drifted to the roof edges. We need more firewood, James said one morning, looking at their dwindling pile. I'll take the wagon to the timber stand. I'll come with you. Sarah, it's too cold. We're partners, she reminded him. Besides, 4 hands work faster than 2. They were halfway to the timber when the blizzard struck. One moment the sky was merely gray and threatening. The next they were enveloped in a white wall of snow and wind. The horses balked, whinnying in fear. We need shelter, James shouted over the howling wind. There's a line shack about a mile north. But in the whiteout conditions, direction became meaningless. They stumbled through deepening snow, leading the terrified horses, until Sarah could no longer feel her feet. Just when she thought they were lost, James spotted the dark bulk of the shack through the swirling snow. Inside, it was barely warmer than out, but at least they were sheltered from the wind. James managed to get a fire started in the tiny stove while Sarah rubbed feeling back into her numb fingers. We'll have to wait it out, he said, pulling her close to share body heat. Could be hours, could be days. We have no food, barely any wood for the fire. We have each other. He kissed her forehead. That's got us through worse. The blizzard raged for 2 days. They melted snow for water, burned what little furniture the shack contained when the wood ran out, and huddled together under every blanket they could find. Sarah drifted in and out of sleep, dreams mixing with reality until she wasn't sure what was real. At some point, delirious with cold, she found herself talking about her mother. She used to sing when she worked, she mumbled against James's chest. Hymns, mostly, but sometimes old folk songs. She had the most beautiful voice. Sing for me, James urged, his own voice rough with cold and exhaustion. So she did, dredging up half-remembered melodies from childhood. Her voice cracked and wavered, but in that tiny shack with death howling outside, it sounded like hope. When the storm finally broke, they emerged to a world transformed. Snow lay feet deep, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. The journey back to the ranch took hours, the horses struggling through drifts, but they made it. Thought we'd lost you for sure, Cole said, providing hot coffee and blankets. That was the worst blizzard in 10 years. You're lucky to be alive. Lucky. Sarah thought about that word a lot in the days that followed. Was it luck that had brought them together? That had seen them through pursuit and prejudice, and now nature's fury? Or was it something more? A stubborn refusal to give up, to let go of each other no matter what came. Spring arrived late, but welcome, melting the snow and turning the prairie green. Their little herd had survived the winter, and 2 of the cows were carrying calves. The garden plot waited for planting, and James had started breaking ground for a proper house. Just 1 room to start, he explained, sketching his plans in the dirt. But built solid, with room to add on when...
When what? Sarah prompted.
He looked up at her, a question in his green eyes. When our family grows.
Children. They'd never discussed it. Too busy surviving to think about the future. But now, with their own land and the promise of stability, the possibility hung between them. I want children, Sarah said softly. Your children. Someday.
Someday, he agreed, pulling her close. When we're ready.
That afternoon, a stranger rode up to their land. Sarah's blood ran cold when she recognized the type. A man who made his living hunting other men, but this bounty hunter brought unexpected news.
Name's Wallace, he said, not dismounting. Got a message for James Callahan, if that's you. I'm listening, James said carefully, his hand near his gun. Thomas Brennan is dead. Killed in a range war 2 months back. His father's called off the bounty. Says he's got no quarrel with you now that his boy's gone.
Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. It's over.
Wallace shrugged. Far as I know, old man Brennan seemed broken up pretty bad. Guess losing his only son changed his perspective on things. After Wallace left, they stood in silence, trying to absorb this sudden lifting of the shadow that had hung over them for so long. We're free, James said finally.
Really, truly free.
Sarah thought about writing to her father, then decided against it. That chapter of her life was closed, no matter what. But at least now they could live without looking over their shoulders, without fearing every stranger who rode up. That evening, as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset, Sarah finally found the courage to say what had been growing in her heart for months.
James. I love you.
He went very still, then turned to look at her.
Say that again. I love you,
she repeated, stronger this time.
I know I said I didn't believe in love, but I was wrong. Or maybe I just didn't understand what it really meant.
And what does it mean?
She thought carefully, wanting to get the words right. It means choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. It means being stronger together than apart. It means... She smiled. It means believing in something bigger than yourself. Believing in us.
James cupped her face in his hands.
I love you too, Sarah. Whatever name you go by, whoever you become, I'll love you till my last breath.
They were married the next Sunday by the circuit preacher who came through Sage Valley monthly. It was a simple ceremony, witnessed by the ranch hands and Mrs. Cole, who cried happy tears and baked a cake for the occasion. That night, in their little cabin that would soon be replaced by a proper house, Sarah lay in her husband's arms and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a chance meeting in a dusty store to this moment of perfect contentment. It seemed impossible. Yet here they were. No regrets, James asked, as if reading her thoughts.
None, she said firmly. Not one.
Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon, their wild chorus carrying across the prairie. But Sarah no longer heard loneliness in their cry. Instead, she heard freedom, survival, the fierce joy of creatures living life on their own terms. Just like them. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and uncertainty in equal measure. There would be hard times, drought years and harsh winters, the struggle to build something from nothing. But there would be good times too, children's laughter filling their home, successful harvests, the deep satisfaction of land shaped by their own hands. Most of all, there would be love, not the desperate, all-consuming passion of stories, but something better, a steady flame that warmed without burning, that gave light in the darkest times, that would last as long as they both drew breath. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes, safe in the arms of the man who'd taught her to believe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. Home. 5 years had transformed their 20 acres into a thriving small ranch.
The one-room cabin had grown into a proper house with 3 rooms and a wide porch where Sarah loved to sit in the evenings. Their herd had expanded to 30 head of cattle, and the chicken coop James built produced enough eggs to sell in town along with Sarah's preserves and baked goods. But the greatest change sat on Sarah's hip as she worked in the garden. 2-year-old Mary, named for James's mother, with her father's green eyes and her mother's determined chin. Inside the house, baby William, barely 6 months old, napped in the cradle James had carved with his own hands. "Mama, help!" Mary demanded, holding up a handful of weeds she'd pulled along with the carrots. "Gentle, sweetheart," Sarah said, showing her daughter how to distinguish between vegetable and weed. "Like this, see?" The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. James was returning from town earlier than expected, and he wasn't alone. A woman rode beside him, her posture stiff with exhaustion. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she recognized her. Elizabeth Morrison, Thomas Brennan's younger sister, though she bore little resemblance to the pampered girl Sarah remembered. Her fine clothes were travel-stained, her face gaunt, and her eyes held a haunted look. "Sarah," James said carefully as they dismounted, "we have a visitor." Elizabeth stood uncertainly, clutching a small valise. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go." "What happened?" Sarah asked. Despite her misgivings, the woman before her looked broken. "My father, after Thomas died, he changed, became cruel, violent. My husband tried to stand up to him and—" Elizabeth's voice cracked. "There was an accident. Richard's dead, and Father says I'm no longer welcome in his house." Mary tugged at Sarah's skirts, curious about the stranger. Sarah lifted her daughter automatically, mind racing. Every instinct screamed to send this woman away. She was a link to their past, to danger. But looking at Elizabeth's desperate face, she couldn't do it. "Come inside," she said finally. "You need food and rest. We'll sort the rest later." Elizabeth's presence created a strange tension in their home. She helped with chores without complaint, was gentle with the children, and never mentioned the past that connected them. But Sarah couldn't relax, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The truth came out one evening after the children were asleep. Elizabeth sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "I know what Thomas did to you," she said suddenly. "The bounty, the pursuit. I'm ashamed I didn't try to stop it." "You were his sister," James said evenly. "Family loyalty is understandable." "Is it?" Elizabeth turned to face them, tears streaming down her face. "I knew what he was. Cruel, possessive, violent. I watched him destroy everything he touched, and I said nothing because it was easier to look away." She met Sarah's eyes. "I'm sorry. I know it means nothing now, but I'm so very sorry." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of it. "We all make choices we regret," she said softly. "The question is what we do next." Elizabeth stayed a month, slowly healing from whatever horrors she'd fled. She was good with the children and pitched in without complaint, but Sarah could see she didn't belong here. This was their sanctuary, hard-won and precious. Elizabeth needed to find her own. The solution came in the form of Dr. Martin Hayes, the new physician in Sage Valley, a widower with 2 young children. He was immediately taken with the soft-spoken Elizabeth when she helped treat his daughter's fever. Within weeks, they were courting, and Elizabeth moved to town to help with his practice. "She seems happy," Sarah observed, watching Elizabeth and Dr. Hayes at the town social, his children clinging to her skirts. "Everyone deserves a second chance," James replied, spinning her in a waltz. "We got ours." Life settled back into its rhythm, seasons of planting and harvest, brandings and drives to market. Mary grew into a fearless child who could ride before she could properly walk, while William showed his father's gift with animals, toddling after the chickens with delighted squeals. Then came the letter that changed everything. Sarah was making bread when James brought in the mail from town, his face grave. "It's from your father." Her hand stilled in the dough. "My father is dead to me. Sarah, he's actually dying, says he wants to see you before the end, to make amends." She snatched the letter, reading her father's shaky handwriting. Cancer, the doctor said, months at most. He'd sold the store, had no one to tend him. He begged her forgiveness, wanted to meet his grandchildren before it was too late. "I won't go," she said flatly. "Sarah." "No." She slammed her floury hands on the table. "He cast me out, chose his prejudice over his daughter. Why should I care about his regrets now?" James pulled her into his arms, letting her rage and weep against his chest. When she finally quieted, he spoke softly. "Because carrying hate is like swallowing poison. It doesn't hurt him, it hurts you. You think I should forgive him? I think you should do whatever gives you peace. But consider this. Our children will ask about their grandfather someday. What will you tell them?" Sarah thought about that over the following days, watching her children play. Mary had her grandfather's stubborn streak, William his thoughtful nature. Did she have the right to deny them that connection, even if the man had hurt her? In the end, love won over anger. They made the journey to Redstone Creek, the children wide-eyed at their first long trip. The town looked smaller than Sarah remembered, dustier and more worn. The store had a new sign, Patterson's Mercantile, but otherwise seemed unchanged. Her father's house, she couldn't think of it as home, sat above the store as always. But the man who answered her knock was a shadow of the father she'd known. Cancer had wasted him away, leaving only sharp bones and regret-filled eyes. "Sarah," he whispered, tears sliding down his sunken cheeks. "My girl, you came." "These are your grandchildren," she said stiffly. "Mary and William." Marcus's face transformed as the children, with the fearlessness of youth, approached his chair. Mary showed him her rag doll while William babbled about the horses they'd seen on the journey. Over the next days, Sarah watched her father with her children, saw the joy they brought to his final weeks. He told them stories of their grandmother, showed them the music box that had been hers, gave them the love he'd been too proud to give his own daughter. "I was wrong," he said one evening, when the children were asleep. "About James, about everything. I let fear rule me, fear of losing you like I lost her. Instead, I lost you anyway." "Papa, let me finish." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "I've left everything to you and the children. It's not much, but there's some money, your mother's jewelry. And Sarah, be happy, that's all I want now. Be happy." Marcus McKenna died 2 weeks later, Sarah holding one hand and James the other. They buried him beside her mother, the two graves side by side under the desert sky. "Do you want to stay?" James asked as they stood at the graveside. "The store, the house, we could make a life here." Sarah looked around at the town that had shaped her, caged her, and ultimately freed her by forcing her to leave. "No, this isn't home anymore. Home is where we built it, together." They sold the property, using the money to buy more land adjoining their ranch. The jewelry went into a box for Mary when she was older, along with the music box and a photograph of the grandparents she'd barely known. The journey back to Colorado was different from their flight years ago. Then, they'd been desperate, looking over their shoulders. Now they traveled as a family, secure in who they were and where they belonged. "Mama, tell the story," Mary demanded one night as they camped under the stars. "Which story, sweetheart? How you and Papa met, how he saved you from the bad man." Sarah smiled, pulling her daughter close. It had already become family legend, shaped and softened for young ears. "Well, once upon a time, there was a girl who didn't believe in love." "But Papa said believe in me instead," Mary interrupted, knowing the tale by heart. "That's right, and you know what she did, and they lived."
happily ever after.
Most days, Sarah corrected gently. Some days are hard, but they face them together, and that made all the difference.
Later, after the children slept, she and James sat by the dying fire. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, witness to all their struggles and triumphs.
"Do you think he found peace?"
Sarah asked.
"My father—"
"I think he found what matters most at the end. Love and forgiveness. Can't ask for more than that." Sarah leaned into her husband's warmth, thinking about the long road that had brought them here. From fear to courage. From isolation to connection. From a woman who didn't believe in love to one who knew it as surely as she knew her own name.
"I love you,"
she said, words that came easily now.
"Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself."
"Always," he promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Always." The fire burned down to embers, but they stayed there a while longer. Two souls who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did. But tonight, under the vast western sky, they were simply grateful for the journey that had brought them home. In the distance, a coyote sang its wild song, and Sarah smiled. Some things never changed. And some things, the important things, changed everything. That was the real miracle. Not that love conquered all, but that it gave you the strength to conquer yourself. And in the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. 40 years had painted silver in Sarah's hair and etched lines around James's eyes. But the love between them had only deepened with time. They sat on their porch, watching the sun set over land that now stretched for hundreds of acres. A legacy built with sweat, tears, and determination.
"Grandma Sarah, tell us the story."
Little Emma, their eldest grandchild, climbed onto Sarah's lap while her brothers, Thomas and Sean, settled at James's feet. Mary, now a mother herself, smiled from the doorway, her husband Robert beside her. William and his wife Catherine were in the kitchen, preparing dinner with their own children.
"Which story, little one?"
Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. "The one about when you didn't believe in love." Sarah exchanged a glance with James, his green eyes still capable of making her heart skip after all these years. "Ah, that story. Well, once upon a time, there was a young woman who thought she knew everything about the world." As she spoke, weaving the familiar tale, Sarah's mind drifted to all that had come after those early days. The drought of '81 that nearly broke them, working side by side to haul water for the cattle. The year Mary caught scarlet fever and they'd prayed through endless nights. William's wedding, where James had cried unashamed tears of joy. The day they'd finally paid off the mortgage and owned their land free and clear. "But Grandpa said, 'Then believe in me,'" Emma chimed in, knowing her favorite part. "That's right," James rumbled, his voice deeper now, but still carrying that Irish lilt. "And she did, eventually. Took some convincing, though. Your grandma's stubborn as a mule." "Pot calling the kettle black," Sarah retorted, earning giggles from the children. Later, after dinner, when the grandchildren had been tucked into bed and their own children sat talking quietly by the fire, Sarah and James walked out to the old oak tree they'd planted their first year on the land. It towered above them now, its branches spreading wide like protective arms. "Did you ever imagine this?" James asked, pulling her close. "When we were running through the desert, half-starved and scared?" "Never," Sarah admitted. "I couldn't see past the next sunrise back then, but you could, couldn't you? You always saw what we could become." "I saw you," he corrected gently. "Everything else followed from that." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, an owl calling from the barn, the distant lowing of cattle. This land knew their story, had absorbed their tears and laughter, their struggles and triumphs. "I've been thinking," Sarah said slowly, "about writing it all down,
Our story. For the grandchildren and their children. The real story, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. They need to know that love isn't just the pretty moments. It's choosing each other when the world says you shouldn't. It's building something together when everyone expects you to fail. It's believing, James finished, in each other, in the future, in the possibility of happiness despite everything. Sarah turned in his arms to face him. I spent so many years afraid of love, thinking it made people weak, but I was wrong. Love made me strong enough to leave everything I knew, to fight for us, to become who I was meant to be. You were always strong, most, or you just needed to believe it. The Irish endearment, my treasure, still made her smile after all these years. Do you remember what I said that night in Las Cruces? That I didn't know who I was anymore. I remember. I know now. She touched his weathered face, tracing the lines that told their shared story. I'm Sarah Callahan, wife, mother, grandmother, rancher, fighter, survivor, and a woman who believes in love with every fiber of her being. Took you long enough to figure that out, he teased. She laughed, the sound carrying across their land. Good thing you're patient. Good thing you're worth waiting for. The next morning, Sarah sat at her desk, a fine piece James had made for their 20th anniversary, and began to write. The words flowed like water from a spring, telling of a young woman trapped by fear and expectations, of a man who saw past barriers of blood and prejudice, of a love that demanded everything and gave back even more. She wrote about the ugly parts too, the violence, the persecution, the moments when giving up seemed easier than going on. But mostly she wrote about choice, the daily choice to love, to forgive, to build rather than tear down, to hope when hope seemed foolish. What are you calling it? Mary asked, reading over her shoulder. Sarah thought for a moment, then smiled. Then, Believe in Me, a Western love story. It's perfect, her daughter said, hugging her tight, just like you and Papa. Oh, we're far from perfect, but we're perfect for each other. Sometimes that's all that matters. As the days passed, the manuscript grew. James would add his own memories, correcting details, reminding her of moments she'd forgotten. The children and grandchildren gathered to hear chapters read aloud, gasping at the dangers, cheering at the triumphs, sometimes crying at the losses. It's like a storybook, young Thomas said one evening, but it's real. The best stories usually are. William told his nephew, they just need someone brave enough to live them and wise enough to share them. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole valley came to celebrate. The Cole Ranch, now run by Harrison's son, sent over a whole steer for roasting. Elizabeth, now a grandmother herself, brought her famous apple pies. Even visitors from Redstone Creek made the journey, including old Sheriff Patterson's daughter, who remembered Sarah from her shop girl days. You caused quite a scandal, running off like that, she said with a smile. Folks talked about it for years. Good, Sarah replied. Maybe it gave some other girl the courage to chase her own happiness instead of everyone else's expectations. As the party swirled around them, Sarah and James found a quiet moment alone. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, the same colors that had witnessed their flight all those years ago. Any regrets? James asked. Their old ritual? Only one, Sarah said, and his eyebrows rose in surprise. I wish I'd believed you sooner. Think of all the time we'd wasted while I was busy being afraid. Nothing was wasted. Every moment led us here. He gestured to their family, their land, the life they'd built. And here is exactly where we belong. That night, Sarah finished the last chapter of her manuscript. She wrote about legacy, not just the land and cattle they'd leave behind, but the lessons learned and shared, about how love wasn't a feeling, but an action, repeated daily, in small kindnesses and large sacrifices, about how believing in someone else could teach you to believe in yourself. She wrote her final words carefully, knowing they were the most important. I didn't believe in love. I thought it was weakness, delusion, a pretty lie people told themselves to make life bearable. But James taught me that love isn't about believing in fairy tales or happy endings. It's about believing in each other, in the strength you find together, in the future you build with your own hands. Love bears all things, not as a burden, but as a gift. It transforms all things, not by magic, but by choice. It conquers all things, not through force, but through faith. I know this now. As surely as I know my own name, love is real. It's the most real thing in this harsh and beautiful world. And sometimes, when you're lucky enough to find someone who sees past your fears to the person you could become, all you have to do is believe. Just believe. The rest will follow. Sarah set down her pen and looked out the window at the oak tree, standing sentinel in the darkness. Somewhere in the house, she could hear her grandchildren laughing, her children talking, James's footsteps on the stairs coming to join her. "Finished?" he asked from the doorway. "The book. Yes, our story." She rose and went to him, this man who'd changed everything with 5 simple words. "Never." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise renewed after half a century. And Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that some loves truly were eternal, not because they were perfect, but because they chose to be, over and over, every single day. Outside, a coyote sang to the rising moon, its voice carrying across the prairie. Sarah smiled, hearing in its cry not loneliness, but celebration, wild and free and absolutely, unshakably real. Just like love itself, for those brave enough to believe. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Sarah and James's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and the untamed frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these Western tales alive for everyone to enjoy.